Hello! Today we're going to talk about evil people and what they did for the fashion industry. How fun this may be for a history lesson. We shall begin. The Nazis, as evil as they were, may well have been as close to evil as we have ever seen on this earth. But they understood branding, to say the least. Senior Nazi and rank Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, knew all about the power of appearance. He knew that scruffy combat fatigue instilled very little fear in people, but pristine uniforms tailored to make the wearer look as tall, broad, and imposing as possible have an intense impact. Goebbels was stickler for precision, especially when it came to fashion, like Zoolander he was. It is rumored that he owned hundreds of suits, so that you would never have to wear the same one twice in any given calendar year. By insisting on having such a recognizable look, Goebbels was instilling in the Nazis a strong brand presence. Apologize if I say his name. Actually, no apologies. He was a Nazi. Screw him. Never before had military aggression and fashion come together so forcefully during that time era, and it made a big impact. The world of high fashion has shown signs of military, and specifically Nazis, influence ever since. Since their birth in the 1930s, Nazi uniforms have served as a benchmark for evil costume design. Given the scope of their crimes and staggering level of aristocrat type the Nazis were responsible for, it is no huge surprise that modern fiction often stylizes its villains as Nazi-esque. Nazism is an easy signifier for audiences that bad guys are well bad. We have seen it time and time again in film. Take George Lucas's Empire Strikes Back, of course, for example. The Galactic Empire in their military-style get-ups could easily be mistaken for being third rank. Lucas had been admitted as much. The Nazis are basically the same costumes as we used in the first film, and they are designed to be very authoritarian, very empire-like. You go, Lucas. When Hitler's men began invading Europe, Gabrielle Bonjour Chanel was already an established and respected fashion designer. Better known by her nickname Coco, she has pioneered the iconic little black dress look. But the Nazi occupation of France was the culprit to her superstardom, and in the most unusual way as possible. Instead of resisting or going into hiding, Chanel decided effectively to embrace Nazi rule. She took a German lover by the name of Hans Gunther von Dickerloch and became a spy, helping recruit for the Third Reich. After the war ended, far from being shunned for her behavior, Chanel was quickly established as the foremost French fashion designer of the day, and she wasted no time doing and building her empire. If anything, the rumors of her association with Nazi Germany gave the Chanel brand publicity and even, strangely, an air of mystique. Good job, Coco. It seems ridiculous now, but people once loved the toothbrush mustache. Were it not for Adolf Hitler's adaptation of it, you might see more upper lip of men today having this style. Pre-Furore, it was popular style of the mustache. Oliver Hardy and Charlie Chaplin, two of the biggest stars in the world at that time frame, both wore one with pride and inspired men across the world to follow suit. It wasn't Chaplin that influenced Hitler to trim his facial hair into the shape of a toothbrush. That is an urban myth. Initially, Hitler wore his mustache long, in the popular handlebar style type. But while fighting in the Great War, it would get in the way of his gas mask, so he had to trim it down to fit, and as doing so, he kept it like that. Earlier I said how Joseph Goebbels made sure that Nazi officers always looked the part, and that was never more true than when he oversaw the design and production of uniforms for the most feared of all the Nazi military units. The SS, the sight alone of the black dress uniforms and the sinister Death's head skull on their caps was enough to cause anybody terror. Black being historically an evil-oriented color, and Death's head skull being, well, death of anything. Goebbels instructed Munich-based outfitter Hugo Boss and his staff to create the SS uniform. Boss was already producing the infamous brown shirts, at the time anyway, as worn by Sturmabteilung, the fear paramilitary wing that met its end in the bloody left-wing purge of 1934, known as the Night of the Long Knives. Not the short knives, but the long ones. And when high-ranking Nazis told you to do something, you did it. So it is difficult to lay too much blame on Boss's door. Although he did go on to proceed over a production line that used almost entirely forced labor, a lot of you out there probably still buy Hugo Boss suits, cologne, and sunglasses. But what would you do if you truly knew his role in World War II? If it helps, they have since apologized for what happened. Apologies or words is, I guess, better than actually doing, so no worries. Even while his sister served in the French resistance and was captured by Nazis, fashion designer Christian Dior kept his head down and worked for the Nazis, often making making dresses and outfits for their wives of high-ranking officers, some saw him as a traitor and a shill for working for the Germans. But as he saw it, he was just doing what he had to do to keep French high fashion alive, as we all do during World War II Nazi era. Before World War II, Dior was working on a designer for a respected fashion house run by Lucien Lelong. But the experience of the Nazi occupation of France and his newfound mission to preserve France as the home of fashion was enough to encourage. Dior set up his own fashion house, and in doing so he became a household name across the world. Lovely. Louis Vuitton handbags are one of the most iconic and famous handbags on the planet. The cheap-looking brown poo of the handbag is amazing to say the least. It is the cheap Walmart brand of high fashion. When the Nazis invaded France in 1940 and the Vichy state ruled the country, most brands were pressed and their stores closed down. But Louis Vuitton thrived throughout the entire occupation of war. In fact, they were the only brand given permission to operate the store on the ground floor of Hôtel du Parc, where France's puppet government operated during the early 1940s. The French brand got these allowances through openly, brazenly, and shamelessly cooperating with the Nazis. While Louis Vuitton competitors either refused to deal, went into hiding, or went out of business, they stayed afloat. After the war, the market was there for the taking. Would Louis Vuitton have the market position it enjoys now, have it being called Hitler & Co? I don't think so. Anyway, we move on. Anti-authority subcultures was also something of Nazi fashion, so forth. The primary motif of the Nazi regime was the swastika, an equally armed cross with arms jutting out of right angles. It was once an ancient sacred symbol of peace. Oddly enough, Nazi camps and all that jazz. Until Hitler and his goons got their hands on it, of course, they repurposed it in the swastika and has been a stigma ever since. Such is the symbol's design ability to offend or mere glimpse of it. It is sometimes used by people who wish simply to shock an audience. Biker gangs of the 1960s and 70s used swastikas, iron crosses, and SS-style lightning bolts on their clothing. Performance artists have borrowed iconic imagery from the Nazis ever since the end of the war as well. And let us not forget the prolific of the swastika and other Nazi symbols when punk rock exploded in the 1970s. While bikers and punk rockers have flirted with neo-Nazism, the images have mostly been employed to merely shock and offend. A sort of art through provoke-ish affair. Having a drink in an Indonesia cafe, or go watch a Japanese girl band perform, or attend a school parade in Taiwan, you may find something really quite disturbing. Over it, an unbanished Nazi imagery on display. Those examples are all real, by the way. Back in 2013, widespread controversy and condemnation forced an Indonesian cafe owner to shut down his Nazi-themed bar in Java. Sony had to apologize in 2016 after one of their acts, a popular girl band name called Kashizisha 46. I butchered that, I don't care, Nazi stuff. Performed a concert all dressed as SS officers. And somehow, Hinshi Kung Fu High School in Tapai managed to design, create, and stage an entire anniversary parade themed around Adolf Hitler before anyone realized that it was not an appropriate thing to do. How smart of them. Education in Asia surrounding World War II mostly focused on the events that concern the continent. The wider context, and specifically the horrors of Holocaust, are rarely touched upon. So a whole generation of children in Asia in growing up is ignorant of just what the Nazis did in Europe in the 30s and 40s. Let me know down in the comments if that is a true statement. I'm very curious your thoughts, if you live in Asia and so forth, what your parents or grandparents may think of Holocaust and so forth. The true gravity of events might be lost on many young Asians, but the clothes and insignia and symbolism are still familiar. Swastikas and salutes have bled into modern culture somehow. It might be slightly naive to assume that there isn't a hint of rebellion in the Nazi chic craze, but there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of malice involved in the superficial adaptation of Nazism. Still doesn't make it right. That is evil. Germany was a prominent player in European fashion in the 20s. Of the 20s, the good old days of dancing and so forth and war. Before the Nazis, Berlin, Munich were epicenters of design and high-end clothing. But when Hitler came to power, he sought to reshape the national image of the German women. Hitler preferred women to dress sensibility and plainly. His argument was that the true Aryan beauty of the German women should shine through. They didn't need makeup, fingernail polish, or elaborate dresses. The dictator believed the Nazi-controlled fashion industry would aid Germany German victory into the war effort. To this end, the Nazi establishment Reich Fashion Bureau to control how German women dressed. Under the Bureau rules, women were permitted to wear only German-made clothing crafted with German materials. The fashion style of the time, pioneered by designers like the fashion Nazi sympathizer Coco Chanel, was for a more boyish look. This meant shorter hair and clothes that made women look slimmer. Hitler liked women to have a more round, fertile look, believing this would lead to more offspring for the Reich. Full bust, shapely legs, and curvature figures, and through the Reich Fashion Bureau, Hitler got his wish. It was Aufwärtsstraße, or goodbye, to the boyish look. Well, wasn't that depressing and fun, and hopefully quite interesting? Even though this is a controversial topic, I find it quite fascinating that a lot of high-end brands back in the day were Nazi sympathizers or work with Nazis. Anyway, hope you have a great one. Thanks for the subs. Have a great one. Again, bye.